all in all, it became a very, very attractive position. Went through the interview process and was lucky enough to work for a professional baseball team. When not the job I wanted when I was 10 years old, and I
Yeah.
wanted to be, the next Fernando Valenzuela. But nevertheless, I worked for a Major League Baseball team.
Welcome again to Chino y Chicano. I'm Enrique Cerna. Thank you for joining me. Well, coming up, a conversation about baseball, business, and Latinos with Fred Rivera. Fred is the former executive vice president and general counsel for the Seattle Mariners. About a year or so ago, he decided to step away from that role and create his own company called the Rivera Group. It is a sports business advisory firm. Now, Fred is not just a business guy, he's also very active in the community. Fred co-founded the Seattle Hispanic Leadership Network. He's also a former college pitcher, and he still has a passion for the game, no doubt, since he was with the Mariners, and also for competition. And he talks about how he uses that competitive spirit in business. Here now is my conversation with Fred Rivera. I spent time reading about you and looking at your long list of accomplishments. You got one hell of a resume, dude. But the one thing that I kind of wondered in all of this, because I know that you love baseball and baseball was a big part of your life. How did sports help you get to where you are today?
Yeah, that's a great question, and could be a big answer or a short answer. The short answer is that it might be at the top of the list, for the simple reason that I went to college only to play baseball. But for that, I question whether I would have went to college. But backing up even further, growing up as a kid, that's all I did was play, watch, listen on the radio to baseball with my dad, with my grandmother, who was very influential in my life and was a huge baseball fan, a Los Angeles Dodger fan. I grew up in Los Angeles, and taught me to love the game, to love the personalities with the game. I mean, we talk players, we talk coaches, we just talk baseball all the time. It allowed me to generate friends. I mean, that's where I generated 95% of my friends as I was growing up was on the baseball field. It directed me to mentors, adult mentors who believed in me. I think of my high school coach, Wally Hammond, who really took me under his wing and was a significant mentor and really pushed me to go to college and play in college. And even though I was an undersized right-handed pitcher who didn't, as my pitching coach would say, couldn't break a pane of glass, he said, you can go get guys out and go play for a couple of years. And so all of that was really instrumental to really where I am today.
Was it a motivator when you heard your coach say things like that?
He was right, but but I had a pretty deadly breaking ball. I could throw an overhand curveball and a changeup that could dance a little bit. But it was I'm extremely competitive. I am just a really competitive person, and when I pitched, when I crossed the lines, you probably wouldn't recognize me. I didn't have a great relationship with umpires, or opposing batters. I didn't hit, at least starting my senior year in high school, I didn't hit, so I wasn't worried about brushback pitches when I was up to bat. It was really just one man show. So I think I just am naturally competitive, and it didn't necessarily motivate me, those comments, but what it did was instill in me a level of confidence, right? That there is somebody else who believed that I could succeed. And it wasn't only on the field, but it was that I did have that competitive nature, that I could go on and do some other things.
Well, that just was the great setup for you to become a lawyer, right? Because you have to have that other side of you where you have to be a bit of a bulldog at times. particularly if you're either litigating in court or negotiating on behalf of the Mariners, right?
Yeah, you do, and I think the other part of for me of being motivated to and competitive is being prepared. And I think I also learned that in baseball, and I coached my sons in baseball for several years, and I'd always try to instill in them that they don't they don't win the game on game day. But
Hmm.
game day is the result of the process and all the hard work that you put in November and December and January. That was again something that was instilled in me and transferred over into my legal practice, particularly when I was trying cases or any type of dispute. I always wanted to be more prepared than my opponents, and I believe that's how success is managed.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit more about your growing up and your family. Because basically you're a Chicano kid from Southern California. You talked a bit about your grandma. Uh, Tell me about your grandfather, your parents, and how
Yeah.
they influenced you and the challenges you might have had to face and overcome.
Sure. Yeah. My parents were very young when I was born. My mom dropped out of high school to have me. Went back and got her GED, but very young. My dad worked for the telephone company right out of high school, and helped provide for us as a family. Moved around a lot. Lived around my grandparents. Both sets of grandparents lived close to each other in West LA. And ended up spending quite a bit of time, particularly with my grandparents, particularly with my maternal grandparents. Um, my mom also worked, was secretary, administrative assistant for different companies, and my maternal grandmother was influential, and grandfather as well. In hindsight, he was really the first entrepreneur that I came across. He was a gardener.
Yeah.
And a really interesting story that I came to learn after he passed. But he's from Guadalajara, just outside of Guadalajara, Mexico, and was naturally very handy with his hands. Became an amazing gardener, a landscaper in today's vernacular, but he called himself a gardener, and worked for a Japanese gentleman before World War II as his assistant, and learned the business of gardening. And this is in Beverly Hills and some very nice areas in Los Angeles, and learned the business. Sadly, Jimmy Tanaka was his name, was the gardener, was interned in
Mm.
World War II, and my grandfather took over his business when he left. Um, and from then on, that's what he did until his late 60s. Was a gardener and had this business, and he kept his books on the back of a paper napkin. And he did that for 40 years. Bought a house, provided for my mom and her two brothers.
Wow. That's a great example to have, because you really
Yes.
understand the value of hard work. Same thing with my father. He farmed and then he worked for a tree nursery company, but I just saw um, how hard he worked, and it really had a big impression on me. As long as with my mother, also been a school teacher in Mexico, so education was a big factor in all of this. Did you speak Spanish at home, or did your
I didn't know. Sadly, my parents don't speak Spanish either, and as the story, not story, as the reality of that era, my grandparents were punished for speaking Spanish, and that translated to the house where they didn't speak Spanish to their kids. I heard it. I heard both of my sets of grandparents talk Spanish. They talk to each other in Spanish, so I have an ear for it. I actually was just spent 3 days in Querétaro, Mexico. I just got back yesterday and spent 3 days around a group of people where 80% of the time they were speaking Spanish, and I was pleasantly surprised that I have the ear.
oh, good.
I didn't my Spanish is minimal at best, but I could understand more than I thought, just because in the household I did
Yeah.
hear it spoken regularly.
Yeah, well, probably in your DNA, so it comes out there. So yeah. So from all of that, I know you played high school ball, you played college ball. How did you then make the leap from being the ball player to head to law school, which you went to Gonzaga, right?
I did law school. Yeah, I was not a great student in high school. And my first year, I went to a junior college, Santa Monica College, played baseball there. Struggled my first year as well, but had some great professors there and started to really understand what it was to be a student. Transferred the preparation that I had learned in athletics into the classroom and slowly started to get my grades up and really enjoy going to school, enjoy going to classes. When I had some shoulder problems and hung up the cleats after my second year and transferred to Cal State Northridge and did well there. And again, really enjoyed it. I was a history major, American history focus. When I graduated from Northridge, I wasn't done. I knew I wanted to go to school more. My trajectory was master's in history, so I could teach and coach baseball. That's where I was heading. I think through a combination of a pre-law club at Cal State Northridge, family friend, Danny Becerra, who was a lawyer, and I've told this story before about LA law. I grew up in the LA law generation and seeing Victor Cifuentes,
Yeah,
right,
Jimmy
playing by Jimmy
Smits.
Smith,
Yeah.
and seeing that as a role, you got to see to believe, you got to see to do, and that
Yeah.
was one of those factors without a doubt. I applied to law schools. Gonzaga Law School made a generous scholarship offer. Spokane, was less so now, but was an extremely cheap place to live, which was towards the top of my list of criteria. And I ended up at Gonzaga and loved that experience and turned out I actually liked the law.
How did you end up? What was the route to go from Spokane to end up at Perkins Coie, which I know you eventually landed at?
My first job was at the Justice Department. I was in
Wow.
something called the Honors Program, Attorney General's Honors Program. And I moved back to Washington, D.C. I was in the Civil Rights Division. The divisions there are divided up in sections, and I was assigned to the Housing and Civil Enforcement section. So I spent 6 years. This is starting in 93, so I was in the Clinton administration, prosecuting housing discrimination and lending discrimination cases around the country, and ended up trying cases in Philadelphia and Los Angeles and Florida, investigating banks and mortgage companies for redlining and other discrimination. That was a very formative time for me, not just because of the professional experience, but I was able to travel to places around the country that I didn't even know existed and see some of the hardships. Perkins Coie was a firm that I thought very highly of, really respected. When I met the partners there in my interviews, that only multiplied. And when they made an offer to join them, I was honored, humbled, and accepted it and moved to Seattle in 1998.
So 2017, you joined the Mariners, which probably was kind of a very cool thing for you, considering how much you love baseball and your baseball background, although you were going to go there as a general counsel.
I got very excited when it included a portfolio beyond a traditional general counsel role. It included overseeing the community engagement and investment, including the foundation. It included government affairs. It included real estate development around the neighborhood, in addition to being, the chief lawyer for the business. So all in all, it became a very attractive position. Went through the interview process and was lucky enough to work for a professional baseball team. When not the job I wanted when I was 10 years old, and I
Yeah.
wanted to be, the next Fernando Valenzuela, but nevertheless, I worked for a Major League Baseball team.
So you're the Fernando Valenzuela with the legal background. There you
I'll
go.
take that. I'll
Yeah,
take
there you
that.
go. Hey, you gotta look at it that way. Uh, what did that position give you, I guess, personally in your development, not only professionally, but even as a person? What did you get out of that? I mean, there are not very many Latinos in this kind of position, so you have that visibility, and I think that that's an important thing. But I just wonder, what did it mean to Fred Rivera?
Yeah, I think it was a couple things. One, I think about growing up, right? And just really worshiping the professional sports, the players, the front office. I remember going with my grandmother, and behind home plate at Dodger Stadium and the club level was where the general manager sat and all the executives, and we would, peer into the box like who was there that day.
Yeah.
And so being in that position, I think was personally rewarding, and I was very personally proud of that. But there are a few Latinos in Major League Sports and Major League Baseball in the C-suite, and so I recognize that. And unfortunately, it's not the first time I've been a first as managing partner of Perkins Coie, the first person of color to hold that position at any of the offices. And so it's while I'm proud of that, I take that very seriously, and I make sure that I'm and was available for the next generation. It can also take a toll. It can also be a little bit difficult when you get called on a regular basis with that label of being one of the few or the first, et cetera. So overall, wonderful experience for me personally to be able to give back, to be able to hold that role. It can also be a little challenge. Just a quick diversion as I say that. I
Sure.
caught myself. Drew Days. Drew Days was an exceptional attorney. He taught at Yale. He was the African American, led the civil rights division under the Carter administration, was Solicitor General under Clinton. I spoke with him at a panel 15 years ago at Yale Law School, and I actually said that same thing. I said that can be difficult when you get called on because you're one of the few, and he very politely, when he gave his remarks, saying, it's not about you, it's about the next person, it's about the next generation. So you don't have to say yes, you can say no, and here is Enrique Serna, right? Here is, you name it. And so I learned from that as well over the years that one of my roles ought to be to say no and say, here's somebody else who can do what you're asking for.
Yeah. I think what's really important along with that is the fact that, yeah, you may be the first, but it's important to see that first so that others will see you in that same role. And they say, hey, Fred Rivera can do that. Why can't I? So I look at it kind of that way. But I admire where you've been and how you've handled all that. Uh, one of the things that you did, you negotiated the name for the current name at T-Mobile Park.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. We had a long relationship with and successful relationship with Safeco. As Safeco pulled out of that industry in the Pacific Northwest, we had the ability to negotiate with some of the best companies, in the region. And T-Mobile came to the front, and we negotiated a long-term deal with the company, local company based in Bellevue. Did a long-term deal with them, so we put the magenta out front,
Yeah.
and all around. T-Mobile has great relationships across the sports industry, including with Major League Baseball. They've been the longtime sponsor of the All-Star Game, for example. So it was a great fit for us in our region. I'm very happy that we were able to do that deal.
You also did something else in that you helped set up really the history around past baseball in the Seattle area through some of the real estate holdings and restaurant, and so that people could come and eat, but also learn about Seattle's history in connection with, Negro Leagues and things like that.
Yeah, I think I'm one of the things I'm most proud of, if not most proud, is the real estate development we did to the west of T-Mobile Park, and we acquired through long-term leases the entire block. Used to be a brewery, and as we were looking at ways to use that, we did want to engage the community, and part of that development includes a brewery called Steelhead's Brewery, and we first partnered with what was the first African American brewer in the Pacific Northwest, Metier, led by Rodney Hines. We brought him in so that they could brew beer in the space. And we set up this brewery, this tap room called Steelhead's Alley, named after the Negro League team that played in Seattle for about 15 games. It didn't last long.
Yeah.
There's a good reason for it, though. Didn't last long, but it was a Steelhead Alley, and we used that as a way to showcase the history of baseball and softball in the Pacific Northwest going back hundreds of years, highlighting the accomplishments of minority players and women who played softball and baseball. And it's, if anyone has a chance to go in there that's
Yeah.
listening, Steelhead Valley, it's amazing with pictures. We got bats and gloves, a beautiful mural. It's something I'm really proud of, and I hope will live on for generations.
Yeah, I've been there. It's really nice. What made you decide that you want to branch out and do the Rivera Group?
I felt that the things I had come in to do had largely been accomplished. The real estate development, the new community engagement strategy and implementation. We hired a new director of our foundation. And so I thought it was a good time to take a chance and become an entrepreneur
Yeah.
myself, thinking about my grandfather
Yeah.
and start my own business and really bring together the 30 plus years of experience I have as a lawyer and some of the other things I've done and apply it to sports business operators and investors and try to support what they're trying to accomplish in the industry. In general, the sports industry is hotter than it ever has been with transactions of existing teams and franchises, with the growth of, for example, motorsports, in F1 in the US, the long overdue growth of women's sports, not
Right.
only
Right.
the WNBA, but there's a baseball league, there's a hockey league, there's a volleyball league, there's a rugby league. So sports is growing. It's also one of the last, if not the last, pieces of live content that people can consume on television or their devices. And so that has led to an explosion of negotiations for the rights fee to broadcast those things. So there's huge opportunities, there's huge risks, and what I hope to do is support those who want to invest in any of these opportunities, to do due diligence to make sure the investments are appropriate for what the goals are of that investment. And that could be family offices who are trying to diversify their investment. I say that, and the valuations of teams are going up quite a bit, if for nothing else, for scarcity. And the S&P stock market goes down one day, your team value has gone up. So it's very agnostic to what traditional
Wow.
economic indicators are. So supporting those investment opportunities, and then supporting existing businesses who are trying to find new investors as well. And then the third thing is helping with operations, whether or not it's looking for additional revenue opportunities, looking to engage with the community as part of the mission of the organization, and to get the brand out in the way that the organization wants to have it portrayed.
So, how has your background and your days as a pitcher and your love for sports, as I asked you off the top here, how it helped your career, how is that now helping you in what you want to do?
I think number one it's grounded me, right? So as I look at the sports industry and I look at the sports business, at the end of the day, it's about that 10-year-old kid who is going to the game with his or her mom, dad, grandparents, family, who's watching it on TV, who's listening on the radio, who is, getting excited a week before that they're going to go to a Sunday afternoon game. That's what it's about. And I think that no matter how much money is flowing in the industry, how it's used, the strategy that's needed, I think if it's grounded in the experience of those who are watching, and how it binds and connects people, families, individuals, communities, states, countries, nations. When you think about the Olympics, that's how I grew up. That's how I was grounded. That's how I connected with family, community, and I think that experience growing up, I can bring that insight into the clients that I help going forward.
And we need that so much right now. Let's
We do.
face it. I
We
mean, we
do.
need that bonding, and I know that it means so much for relationships, for families, and
Yes.
in all of those things. Are you just going to be doing pro sports?
No, college is interesting. College sports is interesting.
Yeah, tell me about
Yeah,
it.
I'm trying to stay out of the NIL area just because I think it's going to change. I think that's going to be a ever evolving area,
Yeah,
and I don't want to invest too much in something that I think really, frankly, has to change. I don't think the
right.
current system works at all.
I
That
agree.
said, if you think of whether it's professional or amateur sports, they are revenue generators, and colleges need to take advantage of that in a good way on behalf of the university to use that revenue the right way, whether or not it's to advance Title IX requirements, to advance educational requirements, to invest back into the school. I think they have an obligation to do that. And I have talked to some colleges about, for example, real estate development or stadium development and how to use that to maximize visibility for the university, which is good for the brand, but also how to maximize revenue to invest back into the college.
Yeah, well, that's an important thing for every university now, especially with the demands that NIL and the House agreement and how that has affected just college football and sports altogether. So, is there anything I haven't asked that you'd like to just weigh in on? My good
Uh,
looks or my
yeah, no,
shirt? I don't know. Yeah.
you've hit quite good. I want to thank you for inviting me.
Oh, of course.
We've known each other for a number of years. I think
Yeah.
highly of you. I think highly of
Thank
this
you.
podcast. I've heard them over time and appreciate what you do for the community. And really, I'm humbled to be asked to participate. I think you've covered what I have to give.
One last thing here for those young Latinos that, thinking about their life and careers and what they might want to do. What advice would you give or what would you like to say to them?
Don't be shy about asking for help, for information, for expanding what you think you can do or want to do. I think what I have been most surprised about over the years, over the decades, is how often people say yes to a coffee, to a phone call, to a lunch, where I can ask questions and learn. And that was hard for me. I'm an introvert by nature. It's really hard to get out and do that. But force yourself to go out and do that because you will find kind, willing people to do that, whether they're Latino or not. So I think that's the number one thing. The second thing I would say is that the Hispanic community across the country is growing. Its economic power. I think we're 90 million in the country. The GDP and the spend of Latino community would be, I think, the fifth or sixth highest in the world if it was a country. There is power there, and using the term minority is probably not appropriate anymore for many persons of color, including the Hispanic community. So there's an opportunity to be proud of that and to understand where the Hispanic community fits within our country, not just culturally, historically, but from an economic perspective. And don't be shy about understanding that.
Good words. So I think your grandmother would be proud and your grandfather too. So,
Thank you.
yeah, yeah. Fred Rivera, thanks so much. And let's stay in touch. Best of luck with all of this and be interesting to see where it all takes you down the road here.
Appreciate that. It's going to be a fun ride no matter where it ends up.
All right, Fred, thank you.